In his past life, he earned $300,000 a year and drank coffee from a $2,000 machine. Now he can't even afford a loaf of bread. His body shakes with hunger. His ribs are broken. And the only things he has left are the terminal before his eyes and the knowledge of an entire civilization that hasn't yet been invented here. The first thing he feels is pain. Sharp. Living. So intense that his body curls up into a ball on its own. His ribs are on fire. His left eye won't open. His mouth tastes of iron and dirt. He's lying on something wet, and the air around him stings his nose with a mixture of ammonia, rotten wood, and sweat. Daniel Ryu tries to take a deeper breath and starts coughing. The cough shoots through his ribs so hard he nearly passes out again. His fingers feel wet, rotten straw. Nearby is a stone wall. The masonry is uneven, hand-laid. He runs his palm along it and feels the rough mortar between the stones. Pre-industrial. A coarse woven linen shirt on his body scratches his skin. He raises his hand to his face and freezes. The hand isn't his. Thin, bony, dirt under broken nails. The wrist is so thin that he can wrap 2 fingers around it. Daniel Ryu, a 30-year-old engineer with broad palms from 10 years at a keyboard, lies in a stone basement in a body that weighs half as much as his own. And this is where the strangest part begins. A blue, translucent rectangle flashes before his right eye, with text in English, in that same monospaced font used for terminal logs. Neural Interface version 7.3.1, Recovery Mode. Host Dan Corvus. Vitals critical. Knowledge base 4.2 petabytes available. Welcome back, operator. He stares at the message for 10 seconds. Then 20. The programmer's brain does what it does best. It gathers data. Stone walls. Straw. Coarse flax. Not a single wire. Not a single straight line. Conclusion. Pre-industrial era. The body isn't his. Young. Male. About 18. Emaciated. Beaten. Name on the interface, Dan Corvus. And most importantly, the interface is responding. So he isn't crazy. Or crazy, but with a tool. Daniel says one word out loud. Okay. Then another. If there's a terminal, there's a lever. If there's a lever, I'll turn this world upside down. But first, he needs to eat. Because this body will die within the next 24 hours without water and food. He struggles to stand up. His legs won't hold him. His knees are shaking, and he falls back onto the straw. He tries again. He pushes off the wall with his hand. He gets up. The world is spinning. Gray light filters through the cracks in the floorboards above. So it's daytime. 5 steps up. A wooden door. He takes those 5 steps in a minute. Every step squeezes the last bit of strength out of his body. The door gives way. Light hits his eyes. A narrow, dirty street. Clotheslines strung between the houses. Slush underfoot that's best not to think about. A woman drags a basket on her head. A man pulls a cart loaded with coal. Everyone is dressed in coarse fabric. No synthetics, no plastic. The interface flashes again. Geolocation. Krongard. Capital of the Velmar Empire. A slum district. Population 12,000. High mortality rate. Causes. hunger, infections, violence. He closes the query. Enough. 3 tasks: water, food, a place to sleep. The rest later. He staggers along the wall, clinging to the stones. His body sways. Dark spots float before his eyes, but he keeps going. To stand still is to die. 2 turns away is a well. He pulls up a bucket. His hands shake so much the rope nearly slips out. The water is murky. The interface spits out a warning without a prompt. Bacterial contamination. High probability of intestinal infection. Boil for at least 10 minutes. He has no fire, no dishes, nothing but a shirt and a blue rectangle. He looks at the water, looks at the red text, thinks for 3 seconds, and drinks. Because dehydration will kill him faster than an infection. The water is cold and tastes of rust. Step 1 is done. Now for food. Search. Food sources within a 200-meter radius. 3 bakeries, a butcher, 2 produce stands, a market to the north. Everything costs money. 0 money. 0 strength for manual labor. In his past life, he had stock options and an apartment downtown. Now he can't even buy a crust of bread. What does he have? A brain, an interface, 4 petabytes of data. The knowledge of all civilization up to the 21st century, and a body that can't walk 100 meters without stopping. So we'll sell the only thing that's sellable right now: information. The smell of bread draws him to the right. He follows the scent. A wooden sign with a carved ear of wheat, a bakery. Inside, 2 men are shouting. A fat man in an apron with flour on his hands, the baker. A skinny man with a cart and sacks, the supplier. Daniel freezes at the door and listens. He knows almost no language, but his body remembers fragments. And the interface is already crunching the speech, analysis, pattern recognition. A minute later, he gets the gist of it. The baker accuses the supplier of bringing bad flour. The supplier swears it's the best. A handful of strangely colored flour sticks out of the sack. Daniel looks at the sack. The interface runs an analysis. Moisture content is 1/3 above normal. Early stage fungal contamination. 5% chalk admixture. Conclusion: bread made from this will be covered in gray mold within a week. Here it is. A chance. Small. The only one. Daniel waits until the supplier leaves. The baker stands at the counter, muttering curses under his breath. The interface scans. Around 45. Chronic stress. The underlying motive is fear of financial loss. The name on the sign is Guido. Daniel goes in. The baker sees a skinny, battered, ragged man, and his face hardens. He opens his mouth, most likely to say, "Get out." Daniel strikes first. In broken dialect, slowly, pulling words from his body's memory and the interface's prompts. "Mr. Guido, don't buy from this man, and don't buy from Tara or from Little Yos. The flour is all the same, from the same mill by the north gate. In 10 days, all your bread will be covered in gray mold." The baker freezes. The ragged boy isn't asking. He isn't begging. He isn't holding out his hand. He stands upright and says things a street urchin couldn't possibly know. The baker asks how he knows this. Daniel replies that he also knows the miller on the southern road, where the flour is dry and clean, and that he'll trade 3 copper coins for a warm roll. The baker stares at him intently for 15 seconds. The interface reads his face in real time. Distrust, curiosity, calculation. Then the baker silently takes a warm roll from the shelf and holds it out to the boy. Daniel grabs it, His hands are shaking. He takes a bite and closes his eyes for 3 seconds. It's the most delicious bread of his life. In both lives. He eats slowly, forces himself not to swallow in big chunks. A stomach that hasn't seen food in 3 days might not be able to handle it. The interface reminds him. Small portions. An hour later, they're walking along the southern road. Daniel and the baker. His body protests with every step, but the loaf has given him strength. And 3 copper coins lie ahead. The first 3 copper coins of a new life. He located the mill through the database. The interface analyzed the wind direction and waterways and identified the only mill with a dry storage area in the south. The baker squeezes the flour in his fist, sniffs it, rubs it between his fingers. White, dry, no mold. He looks at Daniel with new eyes, not as a ragamuffin, as a mystery, and pays 3 pennies. Daniel clenches the coins in his fist. The metal is warm from the stranger's palm. In the old world, this wouldn't have been worth anything. Here it's food for 2 days, or a place to sleep, or the difference between life and death. By evening, they return. The baker silently points to a door at the back, a storeroom, sacks of flour, a shelf, an old blanket, dry, warm from the oven, no rats. There's a door that can be locked. The baker says the boy sleeps here, if he names a price for the rye in the morning. Daniel nods. He goes in. He closes the door. He sits down on a sack. And only now does he exhale. For 16 hours he'd kept himself in survival mode, counting, calculating, speaking a language he barely knows, in a body falling apart. The interface is flashing. Sleep, at least 8 hours. His body is on the brink. He lies down. The blanket smells of flour and sweat. He remembers his past life. The monitor, the blinking cursor, a colleague's words. Go to sleep. Are you even alive? It turns out, no, not alive. Or the opposite, too alive. In a body that aches, in a world that smells, in a reality that doesn't forgive mistakes. Tomorrow he needs to find out the grain prices, calculate the markup, learn another 50 words, find clean water, figure out who beat up Dan Corvus and why, figure out who Dan Corvus is, figure out why he's here. But that's for tomorrow. Right now, sleep. He'll pass out in 30 seconds. His body just shuts down, like a server after a crash. He woke up to the smell of bread, warm, yeasty, real. His body ached all over, his ribs, his back, his left eye. But his stomach was growling so loudly it drowned out everything else. Daniel sat up on the bag. The interface was already flashing before his eyes. Morning report. Host status. Body temperature 38.2. Fever. Decrease of 0.4 degrees overnight. Dehydration. Moderate. Ribs. 2 fractures without displacement. Left eye. Hematoma. Vision intact. Recovery. 4 to 6 days with proper nutrition and rest. Daniel read the report. He couldn't wait 4 to 6 days. He had a window of opportunity. A small one. The baker had given him a place to sleep in exchange for advice on pricing. One piece of advice. If Daniel didn't prove himself useful by morning, and tomorrow, and the day after, and a week from now, he'd be back on the street by evening. He stood up. His legs were holding up better than yesterday. The roll and the sleep had done their job. He stepped out of the storeroom. The bakery was already open. The oven was humming. Guido was kneading dough. A girl was standing nearby, about 17 years old. Her hands were covered in flour up to her elbows. Dark hair, tucked under a scarf. She saw Daniel and said something sharp. The interface translated. She asked who he was and why he had been sleeping in their storage room. Guido answered without turning around. "It's the boy who found us some good flour. Let him live for now." The girl looked at Daniel, appraisingly. No pity, no interest. Just a check. Fit or not. The interface displayed the scan. Mira Gavidi. Approximate age, 17. Daughter. Physical condition, good. Nutrition, adequate. Micro-expressions. Skepticism, mild irritation. Basic motive, protection of father and business. Daniel made a mental note. The baker's daughter. Important. She makes decisions on par with her father. Maybe even more so. Gavito tossed a question over his shoulder. What price to set for rye today? Daniel was ready. He had spent the last few minutes before bed querying the interface. Analysis of grain prices at the Krongaard City Market. The interface had no data from this world, but Daniel had walked along the southern road yesterday and looked. At everything. At every stall. At every sign. At every coin one person handed to another. The interface remembered everything. Faces, numbers, gestures. From these fragments, he built a rough model of pricing in the neighborhood overnight. Daniel replied, Today, rye bread should be priced at 2 copper coins for a large loaf. Tomorrow, it can be raised to 2.5, because Bruna's bakery on the next street will close in 3 days. He gets his flour from the same mill. Mold has already started to grow. In a week, Guido will be the only baker in the neighborhood with decent bread. And then the price can be set at 3 copper coins. Guido stopped. Dough was hanging from his fists. He turned and looked at the boy. Mira turned too. The 2 bakers looked at the skinny, ragged kid with a black eye who was explaining to them how to make 3 times as much money. Guido asked how he knew all this. Daniel said he could count. The baker was silent for a moment. Then he nodded and tossed him a loaf from that morning's batch. Mira said nothing, but Daniel noticed her squint slightly. She was memorizing. She was counting, too. In her own way, without an interface, but she was counting. For the next 3 days, Daniel barely left the storeroom. His body demanded rest, and he gave it rest. He ate twice a day. Guido gave him bread, sometimes some soup. Mira brought water. She silently placed a mug by the door and left. Daniel drank, ate, slept, and worked. Every spare minute he studied the language. The interface acted as an accelerator. He could hear Guido and Mira talking behind the wall. The interface parsed every word, recorded it, constructed grammatical patterns, found the roots. By the end of the 3rd day, Daniel already understood 70% of spoken language. He spoke worse. His accent was terrible, but he could explain what he meant. At the same time, he was studying the world, query by query. Krongaard. Population. Approximately 200,000. The largest city on the continent of Erwald. Capital of the Velmar Empire. Current ruler, Emperor Haldric IV. Status. Ill. Heirs. 3 sons. First, Prince Marcus. Military. Tough. Second, Prince Lionel. Diplomat. Moderate. Third, Prince Victor. Cleric. Fanatic. He gathered all this from snippets of conversation on the street, from the shouts of town criers, from the chatter of customers in the bakery. The interface recorded every word, every name, every number, and stored it in the database. 3 days later, Daniel had a map of the neighborhood in his head. Every street, every shop, every alley. The guards' positions, patrol times, the garbage collectors' routes, the market schedule. On the 4th day, he went out. His body still ached, but the fever had subsided. His left eye was opening. The swelling had subsided to a yellow-green bruise. He could walk. Slowly, but he could. And he had a goal. He needed to figure out who Dan Corvus was, who had beaten him up, and what it meant to be a nobody in this world. The answer came quickly. In an alley behind the market, a guy in his 20s spotted him. Broad-shouldered, with a crooked nose. At the sight of Daniel, his face turned angry. He said something. The interface translated it. "Look at that. Corvus the rat is still alive." He came closer. 2 others followed him. The interface instantly provided the data. 3. Armed with knives. Physical condition. Good. Combat experience. Street. Probability of victory in a physical confrontation. 1%. Recommendation. Avoid confrontation. Daniel didn't argue with the math. He turned and headed toward the market. Quickly. The guys behind him laughed. The one with the hooked nose shouted after him that next time Corvus would hand over everything he'd stolen. With interest. Daniel memorized the face, the name, the voice. The interface indexed it. He returned to the bakery, sat down in the storeroom, and sent a query to the interface. All available information on Dan Corvus. The interface replied. Data is limited. Source. Host body's memory. Fragmentary. Dan Corvus. Orphan. Doesn't remember his parents. Lived on the streets of Krongard since childhood. He stole. He begged. Sometimes he worked as a porter at the market. He owed money to the neighborhood gang. He didn't pay. Beaten. Left in a basement. Host's previous consciousness. Status. None. Daniel stared at the last line for a long time. None. The boy died. Beaten and abandoned in a basement. Died from the beating, or from starvation, or from both. And an engineer from the future took his place. With a terminal. With a database. With a brain worth more than this entire neighborhood. But in a body that any street thug could break with a single blow. This was an important realization. A key one. He's not a hero. Not a warrior. Not a mage. He's an analyst in the body of a victim. And the only way to survive is to make other people, strong people, want to protect him. Not out of pity. Out of self-interest, out of calculation, because he's useful, because without him, they lose money. Daniel opened a new request, an economic analysis of the 20 nearest retail locations. Weak points. Opportunities for optimization. Potential clients for consulting services. The interface began processing. By the end of the first week, Daniel was consulting not only Guido. On the 2nd day after his release, he stopped by the butcher's butcher, Olgerd. Olgerd was losing 1/3 of his meat because he was storing it incorrectly. Daniel told him about salting. Not the way they did it here, the right way, with precise proportions of salt and herbs that he pulled from the food preservation database. Olgerd gave it a try. The meat didn't spoil for 3 days. Olgerd paid 5 copper coins. On the day, Daniel helped a fabric merchant. The man was buying flax from a middleman at triple the price. Daniel found a direct supplier through the interface. More precisely, he found a village half a day's journey from the city where they wove flax and had no access to the market. The merchant paid 10 copper coins and a bottle of wine. Daniel didn't drink the wine. He gave it to Guido. Guido smiled for the first time. Mira watched. Every evening when Daniel returned to the bakery, she was there, cleaning up, counting the day's takings, jotting something down on scraps of paper, crookedly, slowly. She knew how to write, but poorly. Numbers came more easily to her than letters. On the 5th evening, she approached him. She sat down across from him and said, "Teach me." Daniel looked at her. The interface automatically started scanning. He turned it off, on purpose, for the first time. Because she wasn't a customer or a threat. She was a person asking him for help. He asked what she wanted to learn. Mira said, "Everything. How to count, how to write, what you do when you look at a sack of flour and see what no one else sees." Daniel thought for a moment. Then he nodded. The next morning, he began teaching Mira double-entry bookkeeping, the accounting system invented by Luca Pacioli in 1494. To Mira, it was magic. Pure, impossible magic. Every penny is recorded twice, where it came from and where it went. The total on the left always equals the total on the right. If it isn't, there's a mistake or theft. Mira listened. For the first hour, she didn't understand. For the second hour, she was angry. For the third hour, she started asking questions. The right questions. By evening, she had rewritten the bakery's entire ledger for the past month using the new system. And she discovered that the firewood supplier had been shortchanging Guido by 3 pennies every week. Guido looked at the entries. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Daniel. And for the first time, he called him by his name instead of kid. By the end of the second week, Daniel had 23 pennies, a permanent place to sleep, 2 meals a day, 7 customers among the neighborhood shopkeepers, and his first real friend. Mira came every evening. They sat in the storeroom. He taught her numbers, letters, logic. She learned eagerly, like a hungry person eats, without restraint, without pauses. She asked questions to which he didn't always have answers, not because the interface didn't know, but because the questions weren't about numbers. Why do you help people for pennies when you could ask for silver? Daniel replied that pennies come quickly, but silver requires trust, and trust takes time. She thought about it. Then she said he was strange, but smart, and that her father hadn't smiled that many times in a week in a long time. But not everything went smoothly. The fever returned on the 9th day, stronger than at the beginning. Daniel woke up in the night, drenched in sweat. His body was burning. The interface displayed his temperature, 39.6. An infection, probably from the well water on the first day. Intestinal. Recommendation: antibiotic. Unavailable. Alternative: drink plenty of fluids. Rice water. Rest. Probability of recovery without treatment: 68%. Daniel stared at the number. 32% chance he would die. Here, in the storage room, without ever having started any of what he'd planned. He clenched his teeth and began to fight. He drank water, boiled. Mira brought it, every hour. He didn't ask. She just brought it. Guido made rice water. He grumbled that the boy was too skinny and that it was shameful to be sick at his age. But he made it. For 3 days, Daniel lay on the sacks and fought the fever. The interface tracked it every hour. 39 and 8, 39 and 9, 40, peak. 39 and 7, down, slowly. By the morning of the 3rd day, the fever had dropped to 38. He had survived. 68% had worked in his favor. On the 12th day, he could walk again. Weak, even thinner, but alive. And angry. Not at the world, at himself. 3 days lost. 3 days during which his clients had managed without him. 3 days during which someone could have taken his place. He stepped out onto the street and immediately realized that the world hadn't been waiting. A crowd had gathered outside Brune's bakery. Angry. Moldy bread. Just as he had predicted. Exactly on the 10th day. People were cursing. Brune was shouting that it wasn't his fault. People were heading to Guido's. The line at Guido's stretched all the way to the corner of the street. Mira was standing behind the counter. Flushed. Quick. She was counting money using the new system. A stack of copper coins on the left. A stack of copper coins on the right. Every sale recorded. Not a single mistake. Daniel stood to the side and watched. And for the first time in 12 days in this world, he felt something resembling satisfaction. The system worked. Small, simple, but it worked. He gave the baker information. The baker gave him food and shelter. He taught the baker's daughter how to count. The baker's daughter now ran the business better than her father. A closed loop. Positive feedback. In terms of his past life, this was called an MVP, minimum viable product. Now it was time to scale. In the 3rd week, Daniel did what in his past world was called a pivot. He changed the model. Instead of going from shop to shop selling advice one by one, he offered something else. The back room of Guido's bakery. A table, 2 chairs, hours from noon until sunset. 3 copper coins for a consultation. 5 for drafting a letter. 10 for resolving a trade dispute. He called it an office. Guido called it madness. Who would pay a kid for his words? Mira called it sensible. If 7 people were already coming to him, then others would come too. She turned out to be right. On the first day, 1 man came, a candle merchant. His partner had cheated him. Daniel listened. He submitted a query to the interface regarding commercial law. The interface found analogies in the database from Earth's history. Merchant charters, the commercial codes of medieval Europe. The principles were the same. Daniel drafted a claim in the local language. A well-written one, with references to local customs that he had pieced together from conversations at the market. The candle merchant left with the paper in his hands and the look of someone who didn't believe it would work. 3 days later, he returned. The partner paid up. The candle merchant brought a friend. The friend brought a brother. The brother brought a neighbor. By the end of the 3rd week, 4 or 5 people were coming into the office every day. Daniel wrote letters. He drafted contracts. He tallied debts. He settled disputes. He recorded every transaction in a notebook he had bound himself from scraps of paper. Mira kept the books. Double-entry bookkeeping. Every penny accounted for. In 3 weeks, they earned 112 pennies. That was more than the bakery had brought in over the same period. Guido stopped calling it madness. But money wasn't the main thing. The main thing was information. Every client who sat across from Daniel told him something. Not because they wanted to, because they couldn't help it. To explain their problem, people talked about prices, about suppliers, about debts, about officials who take bribes, about guards who turn a blind eye, about guilds that control the market. Every word was fed into the interface's database. By the end of the month, Daniel knew more about the neighborhood than the city magistrate. He knew who owed whom, who was sleeping with whom, who was stealing, who was honest, who was dangerous, who was useful. A map of human connections, an invisible web of interests and fears. And he sat at the center of that web, a skinny boy with a healing bruise who asked the right questions. On the 25th day, a man of a different sort arrived. Not a shopkeeper, not a merchant, a soldier, a former one. You could tell right away. His posture, the scar on his neck, hands accustomed to holding a weapon. The interface confirmed it. A man 30 to 35 years old. Physical condition, average. Old injuries, a limp in his left leg. Micro-expressions. Despair, shame, suppressed aggression. He sat down, introduced himself. Kane, a former sergeant in an infantry regiment, served 10 years on the northern border. Came back. No wife, no home, no money. Got into debt with a loan shark named Gray Melvin. Now Melvin wants Kane to work for him, as an enforcer, maiming people for their debts. Kane didn't want to, but he saw no way out. Daniel listened. The interface was simultaneously building a profile of the loan shark. Gray Melvin, mentioned in 4 conversations over the past 2 weeks. A mid-level loan shark. He controls the debts of artisans in 2 neighborhoods, under the protection of the district guard. Methods: threats, beatings, seizure of property. A classic scheme. Daniel knew schemes like this, not from the Middle Ages, from reports on financial fraud in the 21st century. The principles are the same. Lend money at an impossible interest rate, wait for the deads, take everything. He asked Kane how much he owed. Kane named the amount, 2 silver coins, a huge sum for a soldier. For Daniel, with his current income, a month's wages. But the interface was already calculating. A debt contract. What were the terms? Kane described them. Daniel listened while simultaneously querying the database on debt law. And he found it. In the local city customs, which he had pieced together from dozens of conversations, there was a rule. If a debtor could prove that the moneylender had inflated the initial loan amount by more than double the market rate, the debt is considered invalid. No one had ever used this rule, because no one could prove it, because they had no records. But Daniel did. 3 of his clients had borrowed money from Melvin. He had written down the terms of each loan, the amounts, the interest rates, the terms, and the market rates, which he had calculated separately. Daniel looked at Kane and offered a deal. He would write off Kane's debt, legally, through the magistrate, without a single blow. In return, Kane would work for him, not as a bouncer, as security. Daniel explained that he had an office, that people came to him, that there would soon be more people, and that there were those who didn't like what he was doing. Kane listened. His expression shifted. Doubt. Hope. Doubt again. He asked why the boy was helping him. Daniel answered simply, because he needed a man who knew how to handle a sword. And Kane needs a man who knows how to handle numbers. It's a trade, an honest one. Kane was silent for a long time. Then he held out his hand. Daniel shook it. Kane's hand was stiff, calloused, heavy. The hand of a man who had killed, and who was tired of killing. The case against Melvin took 4 days. Daniel drafted a complaint. He gathered statements from 3 clients. He attached the calculations. He filed it with the district magistrate. Melvin came to the magistrate's office with 2 thugs. He saw the papers. He turned pale. The magistrate was a lazy, thieving bureaucrat, but even he couldn't ignore a document in which it was written in black and white that the moneylender was violating city custom. Because if he ignored it, the paper would go higher up. And higher up sit people who don't like it when quarter magistrates cover for moneylenders. Because these are their moneylenders and their cut. Kane's debt was written off. Melvin stepped out of the magistrate's office and looked at Daniel, long and hard, memorizing. The interface scanned his face. Hatred, calculation, threat. Daniel remembered, made a note. Melvin would return. Not now, later, when he found a way. He had to be ready. Kane started coming to the bakery every morning. He would sit by the door, silently, with a short sword at his belt. Customers looked at him and didn't ask unnecessary questions. The punks from the market who used to sometimes drop by the bakery stopped coming. The hook-nosed guy who had threatened Daniel in the alley saw Kane once and never approached him again. The physical presence of a man capable of violence completely changed the equation. Daniel knew this in theory. Now he saw it in practice. The month was drawing to a close. Daniel was sitting in the storage room that evening. Mira was nearby. She was copying books. Faster now. Her handwriting had become neater, the letters more confident. She asked what he planned to do next. Daniel didn't answer right away. He was thinking. The office was running. Money was coming in. Kane was keeping watch. But that wasn't not enough. Too little. He could advise shopkeepers until he was old and remain a boy in the storeroom. To rise up, he needed to offer something that no one else in this world could offer. Not advice, not paper. A thing. A product. A commodity that doesn't exist and that everyone needs. He opened the database. A search. High-margin goods that could be produced in a pre-industrial era with minimal investment. The list was long. Daniel scrolled through it. Soap, glass, paper, gunpowder. No, not gunpowder. Not now. Not so soon. Soap. Soap is made from fat and lye. There is fat. Lye from wood ash. There is ash. The process is simple. The result? A product that isn't normally available on the market. Local soap was a brown, smelly lump that made your skin peel. Normal soap. White, fragrant, soft. No one here made that kind, because no one knew the right proportions and temperature control. Daniel closed the interface. He looked at Mira and said he needed 3 things. A cauldron, a sack of ash, and lard. Mira raised an eyebrow. She asked why. Daniel replied, "We're going to make soap." Mira looked at him, then at her hands, chapped, red from the hot water and lye solution she used to wash the counters, then back at him, and she said, "How much ash do we need?" The first bar of soap turned out on the 4th day of attempts. The first 3 were failures. Daniel knew the theory. The interface contained the complete technology of soap making, from the ancient Sumerians to the industrial processes of the 20th century. But theory and practice are 2 different things. The first pot he overheated. The fat separated. The lye turned out to be too concentrated. The result? A brown, caustic mass that burned Mira's hand and prompted her to tell Daniel exactly what she thought of him, without a single expletive. Daniel wasn't offended. He noted the parameters of the mistake, the temperature, the proportions, the heating time, and he adjusted them. Second attempt. Better. The mixture thickened properly, but it cracked as it cooled. Third attempt. Almost there. The consistency was right, but the smell was still disgusting. And only on the fourth try, when Daniel added lavender tea to the mixture, which he'd bought at the market for 2 pennies, did they pull a piece out of the pot. White, dense, with a light floral scent. Mira took it in her hands. She sniffed it, ran it over her wet hand. The lather was soft, white. It didn't sting her skin. Mira silently looked at her soapy hand, then at Daniel. There was something new in her eyes. Not skepticism, not curiosity. Respect. Guido tried the soap that evening. He washed his hands, sniffed it, looked at them as if he were seeing his palms for the first time. After 40 years of working with dough, his hands were cracked and calloused. Regular soap only made things worse. This soap didn't make things worse. Guido said they'd give 5 pennies for a bar like that at the market. Daniel said he'd give 10. Because no one else has soap like this. Guido replied that the boy was crazy. Mira told her father that the boy wasn't crazy. He just saw further ahead. Guido looked at his daughter, then at Daniel. Then he waved his hand and went to bed. Production started a week later. Daniel worked out the exact formula: proportions, temperature control, cooking time, cooling time, additives, lavender for the premium soap, mint for the mid-range, no additives for the budget line. 3 product lines. Mira insisted that the budget line be good too. Daniel agreed. She was right. Reputation is built from the ground up. Kane found a space, a shed 2 blocks from the bakery. The landlord rented it out for 8 copper coins a week. Daniel paid a month in advance. 32 copper coins, almost all their savings. Mira said he was crazy again, but she helped drag the cauldron. Daniel took the first batch to the market himself. 20 bars of soap, 10 lavender ones for 10 copper coins each, 5 mint ones for 7 each, 5 plain ones for 4 each. He didn't rent a spot at the market. Instead, he went to the barber. The interface showed that the barber bought soap from the guild supplier. Brown. Stinky. 6 copper coins a bar. Daniel placed a white lavender bar in front of him. The barber took it, sniffed it, lathered his hands, froze. He looked at Daniel. He asked the price. Daniel said 10, but if you take 5 bars, then 8 each. The barber took 10. He paid 80 copper coins. That was the shop's revenue for 2 weeks. From a single transaction. By the end of the second month, the soap was being sold in 14 shops in the neighborhood, and in 6 shops in the neighboring one. Daniel hired 2 assistants, street boys, 14 and 15 years old. He paid them a penny a day and fed them. They made soap under Mira's supervision. Daniel no longer made it himself. He was designing the next product. Ink. Ordinary ink in this world was expensive and faded within a year. Daniel knew the recipe for iron gall ink, iron sulfate, tannin nuts, gum arabic, water. All of this could be obtained. Iron sulfate was sold by apothecaries. Tannin nuts were gathered by children outside the city. The ink turned out dark, durable. It didn't fade for decades. Production cost, 1/3 of the market price. Margin, 200%. But with the ink came the first real problem. Not a technical one, a human one. In the 9th week, a man in fine clothes came to the office. clean, with a silver buckle on his belt. The interface calculated instantly. A representative of the Soapmakers Trade Guild, mid-ranking. Physical condition, excellent. Micro-expressions, controlled. Professional. This is a man who is used to exerting pressure. He sat down. He introduced himself. Thorn, guild representative. And he said that Daniel was producing and selling soap without a guild license, that this was a violation of the city charter, that the fine was 20 silver coins, or confiscation of property, or prison. Daniel listened calmly. He had been expecting this. The interface had predicted the guild's arrival 2 weeks ago. Probability of conflict, 93%. Daniel had been preparing. He had studied the trade guild's charter, or rather what he could piece together from conversations and fragments of documents. The charter had been written 100 years ago. In 100 years, the city had changed. New trades had emerged, new goods, new technologies. The charter hadn't changed. It had loopholes. Big ones. And Daniel intended to drive an entire caravan through one of those loopholes. The guild controlled soap production. From animal fat. That was spelled out. From animal fat and lye. Daniel nodded. That's right. His soap was also made from animal fat and lye. But, and here he pulled a bar out of his pocket. Lavender. He pointed to the additive. Lavender. According to the charter, soap is a product made from fat and lye. His product is fat, lye, and a plant extract. Formally, it's not soap. It's a cosmetic product. And cosmetic products aren't mentioned. Because 100 years ago, they didn't exist. Thorn listened. His expression didn't change, but the interface saw it. Tension in the muscles around his eyes, rapid breathing, irritation. He hadn't expected a kid from the slums to know the charter better than he did. Thorn said it didn't matter, that the guild would decide how to interpret the charter. Daniel said the guild could interpret it however it wanted, but the magistrate interprets it to the letter. And Daniel had already a notice to the magistrate regarding the production of cosmetics. As a private artisan, legally, with taxes paid. Thorn fell silent. He wasn't used to being refused, especially not to being refused by someone who knew what they were talking about. He stood up, said the boy would regret it, and left. Cain stood by the door and watched him go. Then he turned to Daniel. He asked if it wasn't time to leave the neighborhood. Daniel shook his head. No. Leaving means losing. Running from the very first problem means running your whole life. Something else is needed. We need protection that works not on the level of muscle, but on the level of the system. He needs a patron. Someone at the top. Someone with a title. With a name. With a right that even the guild wouldn't dispute. He opened the interface. A database of the aristocratic houses of Krongard. The information was sparse, pieced together from rumors and fragments, but enough. He was looking for a specific profile, a noble house, one that had fallen on hard times, with a reputation but no money, one that needed what Daniel could offer, money, or something that brings money, knowledge, and one desperate enough to accept help from a commoner boy from the slums. Found it. The House of Alderaan. An ancient lineage. Once one of the most influential in the capital. Now, a single castle within the city limits. Half ruined. The lands mortgaged. 3 servants left. The mon of the house. Count Edmund Alderaan. Sick. Seriously ill. The heiress. Lady Celesta Alderaan, 22 years old, unmarried. She manages what remains of the house. Alone. Daniel looked at the profile. An impoverished house with an ancient name. A sick head of the family. A young heiress without resources. The perfect entry point. He began to plan. But his planning was interrupted the following evening. Mira came into the pantry. Her face was serious. She said her father was ill. Not seriously. A cough. But he'd been coughing for 3 days now, and she didn't like the sound of it. Daniel asked to be taken to Guido. The baker was lying on a bed in the room above the bakery. His face was pale. His cough was deep, wet. The interface initiated a scan. Elevated body temperature. Breathing. Rails in the lower lobes of the lungs. Preliminary diagnosis. Early stage pneumonia. If left untreated, prognosis. Poor. Here, in this world, without antibiotics. Pneumonia killed 1 in 3. Daniel looked at the baker who had given him bread when he was starving, who had let him into the pantry, who had allowed his daughter to learn from a vagabond. The first person in this world who had believed not in him, but in his favor. And this man could die from a disease that in the 21st century was treated with a $2 pill. The interface was waiting for a query. Daniel entered it. Alternative treatments for bacterial pneumonia in pre-industrial settings. The list was short. Thyme, proven antibacterial properties. Honey, anti-inflammatory. Eucalyptus inhalations. No, eucalyptus doesn't grow on this continent. Pine needles. Possible. Steam inhalations with pine needles. Drainage position. Plenty of fluids. No guarantees, but the probability of recovery with a full set of measures, 61% versus 35% without treatment. Daniel didn't hesitate. For 2 days he didn't leave the baker's side. Mira brewed decoctions according to his instructions. Thyme, honey, water, precise proportions. Daniel administered the inhalations himself. He boiled the water. He added pine needles. He held a towel over Guido's head. Every 2 hours he changed his position. Left side, right side, semi-sitting, so that fluid wouldn't accumulate in his lungs. Kane stood at the door and let no one in. Mira hadn't slept for 2 days. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. But she didn't leave. On the second night, Guido's condition worsened. His temperature rose. His cough became incessant. Mira sat by her father's bed and silently held his hand. Daniel stood nearby and watched the interface readings. Temperature, 39.8, 40, 41. A crisis. Either his body would pull through, or it wouldn't. There was nothing he could do. Just wait. And continue the treatment. By the morning of the 3rd day, the temperature began to drop. 39.5. 39. 38.3. Guido opened his eyes. He asked for water. Mira gave him a drink and began to cry. Quietly. Turning away. So his father wouldn't see. Daniel left the room. He went down to the bakery. He sat down on a bench. And only then did he feel blood running from his nose. The interface issued a warning. Neural interface overload. Continuous activity for 2 days. Recommendation: complete shutdown for 12 hours. Ignoring the recommendation will result in damage to the host's cognitive functions. Daniel closed the interface, wiped the blood with his sleeve, and allowed himself a single thought. In his past life, he hadn't taken a vacation in 5 years. He'd worked non-stop. He wrote code. He optimized systems. And he died at the keyboard. Here, he hadn't slept for 2 days. He brewed herbal teas. He did inhalations. He held a towel. And he saved a man. The difference was that code doesn't look at you with grateful eyes. Guido was recovering slowly. He didn't get out of bed for a week. Mira the bakery alone, and she ran it well. Daniel watched. She didn't just bake bread and count money. She managed. She ordered flour. She negotiated with suppliers. She supervised the boys in the soap kitchen. She settled minor disputes with customers. She was 17 years old and ran the business better than half the merchants in the neighborhood. One evening, Daniel told her this. He just said it. "You're doing a good job." Mira looked at him, strangely. Then she quietly replied that no one had ever told her that before. Her father praised her bread. Customers praised her smile. But no one praised her mind. In the 3rd month, Daniel ventured beyond the neighborhood for the first time. Not physically. He'd been to the market and the mill before, but for the first time, he took a step beyond the boundaries of his circle, beyond the circle of people who knew him as the boy from the bakery, into a world where no one knew him and where his life was worth absolutely nothing. The Alderaan house stood on a hill in the eastern part of Krongard. It had once been one of the capital's finest neighborhoods. Wide streets, stone mansions, gardens behind wrought iron fences. Now half the mansions stood empty, windows boarded up, gardens overgrown. The neighborhood was dying along with the nobility that once inhabited it. The war over the inheritance was draining people and money from the capital. Those who could afford to leave had left. Those who couldn't were living out their days behind locked doors. Alderaan Castle was at the end of the street. Small, more of a fortified house than a castle. 2 towers, a stone wall, gates that hadn't been painted in a long time. An old man in livery stood by the gates. The livery was clean but patched, at least 3 times. Daniel approached. He was dressed better than 3 months ago. Mira had insisted. A new shirt, pants without holes, a cloak. Simple, but intact. Cain followed 2 steps behind him, silently, with a sword. The old man at the gate looked at them. The interface displayed a scan. Servant, about 60 years old, loyalty to the house, high. Physical condition, arthritis, poor eyesight, micro-expressions, wariness, defensive posture. Daniel introduced himself. Master Corvus, here to see Lady Alderaan, on business. The old man asked what business. Daniel replied that it concerned the Count's health. The old man hesitated. Then he went inside. Returned 10 minutes later. Let them in. Inside, the castle looked just as Daniel had expected. Large, cold, empty. The furniture was expensive, but old. The tapestries on the walls were faded. The fireplace wasn't lit. They were saving firewood. The room smelled of dust and illness. That specific odor that appears in a house where someone has been sick for a long time and is seriously ill. He was led into the study, a small room with bookshelves. Few books. Most had apparently been sold. A woman stood by the window. Young, tall, dark hair pulled back. A simple dress, Dark, not a single piece of jewelry. Back straight, chin lifted, hands clasped in front of her. The posture of someone who is used to blows and has learned to take them standing up. The interface launched a full scan. Lady Celeste Alderaan, age 22. Physical condition, satisfactory. Signs of chronic malnutrition, mild anemia, lack of sleep. Microexpressions. Control. Strong. Under control. Anxiety. Fear. Pride. Basic motive. Survival at home, at any cost. Intelligence. High. Education. Above average for this world. 4 languages. Music. Rhetoric. Fundamentals of law. Social status. Formally high. In reality, on the brink. Celeste looked at him, silently, waiting. She didn't offer him a seat. She didn't say hello. She economized on words just as she economized on firewood. Daniel spoke first. He said he knew about the Count's illness, that the doctors weren't helping, that the house needed money, that the lands were mortgaged, that in 6 months, if nothing changed, the House of Alderaan would cease to exist. He spoke calmly, without sympathy, without a threat, like a surgeon describing a patient's condition. Facts. Only facts. Celeste listened. Her face remained unchanged, but the interface saw it. A racing pulse, tension in her jaw. She knew all this herself, but for the first time, someone had said it out loud. Then she asked why he had come. Daniel answered. He had come to propose a deal. He would help the house, financially and medically. He would try to cure the Count. He would introduce his own business operations into the house's affairs, which would generate income. In return, he needed patronage. The name Alderaan, the protection afforded by a noble title, the right to act on behalf of the house. Celeste was silent for a long time. Then she asked who he was. Daniel answered, Master Corvus, owner of an office and a soap factory in the southwestern quarter, a consultant, a man who knows things. Celeste raised an eyebrow slightly. A boy from the slums is offering a deal to a count's house. She could have laughed. She could have sent him away. But she did neither, because she was smart, and because she had no choice. She said she wanted to see. Proof. Daniel was ready. He took 3 items out of the bag Kane was carrying. A bar of soap, a bottle of ink, and a notebook with calculations. He placed the bar of soap on the table, the ink bottle next to it. He opened the notebook to the page containing his office's financial reports for the past 3 months. Double-entry bookkeeping. Income, expenses, balance, growth. Hand-drawn graphs. Neat. Precise. Celeste walked over to the table. She picked up the bar of soap. She sniffed it. She opened the ink bottle. She ran the pen across the paper. The line was crisp and dark. Then she looked at the notebook. For a long time. She flipped through the pages. Daniel saw her face change. She was recognizing the system, not the double-entry bookkeeping. She didn't know that. But she was recognizing the order, the logic, the precision, things she valued, things that were missing from her crumbling world. She looked up. She looked at Daniel. And she asked a question he hadn't expected. She asked where he was from. Not which neighborhood. Where he was really from. Because boys from the slums don't know double-entry bookkeeping. They don't write numbers like that. They don't carry themselves like that. Daniel looked her in the eyes. The interface issued a warning. Probability of detecting a lie with a direct answer. High. Subject possesses developed empathy and analytical abilities. Recommendation: minimal truth. Do not lie. Do not tell everything. Daniel answered. He said he had come from far away, that the world he came from was different from this one, that he couldn't tell her everything, not now, but that his knowledge was real, and that he wants to use it to build something, not to destroy, to build. Celeste listened, silently, expressionless. Then she said quietly, she said that every other adventurer in the capital says the same thing, but none of them bring with them soap that smells of lavender and ink that doesn't fade. She said she agreed, on a trial basis. 1 month. He'll treat her father, show results. In a month, she'll decide. Daniel nodded. It was more than he'd expected. Celeste escorted him to the Count's room. Upstairs. Dark, heavy curtains. An old man lay on the bed. Thin, gray. His breathing was labored. The interface initiated a full medical scan. Count Edmund Alderon. Estimated age, 58. Condition, critical. Symptoms, chronic cough, swelling of the limbs, chest pain, weight loss, enlarged liver. Analysis, difficult without instruments. Preliminary diagnoses, heart failure, or tuberculosis, or a combination. Daniel stood by the bed and looked at the old man. This was more complicated than Guido's pneumonia. Significantly more complicated. He wasn't a doctor. He had no medicine. He had only an interface to a medical database and the knowledge that, in his world, was taught to first-year medical students. But for this world, even first-year knowledge was a breakthrough. He started with the basics. Examination. Hands. Nails. Skin color. Edema. He asked the Count to open his mouth. Look up. Cough. Every symptom was entered into the database. The interface built a differential diagnosis. It ruled out options one by one. Not cancer. The symptoms aren't right. Not tuberculosis. No characteristic signs. Heart failure. Possibly. But there's something else. Edema. Enlarged liver. Dark urine. Which the Count mentioned when Daniel asked. The interface issued a refined diagnosis. Cirrhosis of the liver due to chronic alcohol abuse. Complicated by heart failure. Prognosis. Without treatment, 3 to 6 months. With treatment, depends on the stage. A full recovery is impossible, but slowing the progression. Stabilization. Improved quality of life. Possible. Daniel turned to Celeste. She was standing by the door. Her hands were clenched. Her knuckles were white. He told her the truth. Not all of it. Enough. He said her father was seriously ill, that a complete cure was impossible, but that they could buy him time. Months, maybe years. If he stopped drinking. If he sticks to the regimen. If he takes what Daniel prepares for him. Celeste listened. Her face was impassive. Only her eyes shone. She asked how long. Daniel replied that he didn't know exactly. A year, maybe 2, under ideal conditions. Celeste closed her eyes for a second. Then she opened them and said one word. Dell. Daniel spent 3 days at Alderon Castle. He drew up a treatment plan. Diet, no alcohol, herbal teas to support the liver, milk thistle. He found it at the herb market. Dandelion root, honey, sleep schedule, walks in the garden. Slow, every day, 10 minutes, then 15, then 20. Celeste wrote down every word, neatly, clearly, in her beautiful calligraphic handwriting. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She didn't argue. She simply recorded and followed instructions. On the second day at Alderaan Castle, D. Daniel discovered a library. Small, half empty. Most of the books had been sold, but a dozen remained, and among them, one made him freeze. A thick volume in a leather binding. The Chronicle of the House of Alderaan. A family tree. 300 years of history. He opened the book. He turned the pages carefully. The pages were yellow and fragile, and on one of the pages, dated roughly 80 years ago, he saw a name. Advisor Darien. No surname, no title. A man who appeared at the court of Celesta's grandfather, and in 5 years transformed the House of Alderaan from a mid-sized barony into one of the most influential counties in the empire. And then he vanished, without a trace, without explanation. The interface flashed, not with a standard information message, something else, deeper, from a system level to which Daniel did not have full access. A match on keywords, advisor, appearance without a past, rapid rise, disappearance. The profile matches the archive record, previous operator. Daniel closed the book, put it back in its place. His hands didn't tremble, but something tightened inside him. Previous operator. Here, in this house. 80 years ago. It wasn't a coincidence that brought Daniel to the Alderaan house. The interface knew. It knew from the very beginning, and it led him here, like an algorithm that optimizes a route. Daniel stood in the half-empty library and, for the first time in 3 months, felt that he wasn't just playing by his own rules. Something, or someone, was playing a game with them too. He returned to the neighborhood, in silence. Kane didn't ask any questions. He knew how to keep quiet. It was one of his best qualities. Mira was waiting at the bakery. She asked how it went. Daniel said it went well, that they now had a patron, that in a month he would become an official advisor to the noble house. Mira looked at him. Then she said he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Daniel almost smiled. She was closer to the truth than she thought. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in the storage room, staring at the ceiling. The interface was turned off. He didn't need the interface for what he was doing now. He was thinking about the previous operator, about Darien, who had come here just like him, with the same tool, with the same knowledge. He rose, higher than Daniel could now imagine, and then terminated by own request. Reason. I saw what we become. Terminated at his own request. Reason. I saw what we're becoming. What did he see? What could one see with access to all of humanity's knowledge and a tool that sees right through people? What made him not just leave, but erase all traces, except for one line, which sounded like a warning? Daniel lay in the darkness and listened to the stove breathing behind the wall. Warm, alive, like a huge stone heart. And he thought about how tomorrow he would get up, go to the soap factory, check the batch, Stop by to see Mira, see how she keeps the books. He'd stop by Kane's, discuss the deployment of posts, go to Alderaan Castle, check on the Count, talk to Celeste, and continue building, brick by brick, penny by penny, one saved person at a time. Because that's the only thing he knows how to do. Build systems. It's just that before, his systems were made of code, and now they're made of people. And that scared him far more than any bug he'd ever encountered. Celeste's 1-month probation period ended in 23 days. Not because Daniel had failed, because the result was so obvious that waiting any longer made no sense. Count Edmund got out of bed in 3 weeks, for the first time in 6 months. He hadn't recovered. Cirrhosis isn't cured by herbs and a regimen. But the swelling had gone down. His complexion went from gray to just pale. He could walk down the hallway. He could sit in a chip by the window. He could hold a pen, and when Celeste entered his room on the morning of the 23rd and saw her father sitting at the table, reading a letter through the new lenses that Daniel had ground for him personally, she stopped in the doorway and stood motionless for a few seconds. The interface displayed a scan, but Daniel wasn't reading it. Some things don't need to be scanned. Her father was reading a letter from his daughter, one she had written to him 2 years ago, one he hadn't been able to read because his eyes were failing him. For 2 years, that letter had lain on the table, and now he was reading it, and crying, quietly, the way old men cry who have forgotten how to do so. Celeste came to see Daniel that same day. They sat in his office. She placed a document on the desk. The paper was fine. The Alderaan House seal, red wax, the griffin crest. The document appointed Dan Corvus as the official advisor to the House of Alderaan on trade and economic affairs, with the right to act on behalf of the House, with the right to negotiate, with the right to sign contracts. Daniel read the document, every word. The interface simultaneously analyzed the legal nuances. Everything was clean, honest. Celeste wasn't trying to deceive him. She was giving him exactly what she promised. No more, no less. Daniel signed his name, his first signature in this world. His hand was steady. Celeste looked at him. Then she said she wanted to understand one thing. She asked what he really wanted. Not money, not patronage, just the means. What was the goal? Daniel thought. He could have lied, could have said something beautiful, could have dodged the question. But he looked at this woman who, at 22, had held a dying house together and hadn't broken, and decided she deserved the truth, the part of the truth he could give. He said he wanted to change the world, not conquer it, to change it, so that children wouldn't die from diseases that could be cured with clean water and salt, so that girls could read, so that a person was worth more than their surname. Celeste listened in silence. Then she quietly replied that it sounded like heresy. Daniel said he knew. She paused. Then she said that heresy didn't scare her. Only powerlessness scared her. With the Alderaan document in his hands, Daniel returned to the district a different man. Not outwardly. Outwardly, he was still the same skinny guy in plain clothes. But now there was a name behind him. An ancient one. A respected one. Impoverished, perhaps, but still weighty. The trade guild found out about it 2 days later. Thorn came again. He sat down in the demon. He looked at the document bearing the Alderaan seal. The face hadn't changed, but the interface registered it. His pulse quickened. His pupils narrowed. Recalculation. The boy from the slums turned out to be more than just a boy. Thorne said the guild was ready for negotiations. Daniel replied that negotiations were possible. On his terms. Thorne left. Silently. The 4th month. Daniel was expanding his business. The soap factory was running steadily. Ink was selling. But he needed more. The next product. Lenses. Glass ones. For eyeglasses. In this world, glass existed but was crude, cloudy, expensive. Only a handful of master craftsmen made corrective lenses. Each pair cost a fortune. Daniel knew how to cut glass. The interface contained the complete technology, from the Venetian glass-blowing craft to modern optics. The problem was the tools. Cutting required a machine, a sturdy yet precise. Daniel designed it in an evening, in a holographic projection right before his eyes. Every detail was calculated. Materials, wood, metal, leather for the straps, sand of various grits for polishing. Kane found a carpenter. The carpenter assembled the machine in a week. Daniel checked it, made adjustments, showed Mira how to grind. The first lens was ready on the 2nd day. Count Edmund was the first to receive the glasses. Daniel made them himself. The frame was made of thin wire. The lenses were precisely fitted for the specific eyes of a specific person. When the old man put on the glasses and looked out the window, he was silent for a long time. Then he said he could see the leaves on the tree in the garden, individual leaves, for the first time in 3 years. Celeste stood nearby. Her face was expressionless, but the hands she held behind her back were trembling. Daniel saw it. The interface saw it. He said nothing. The glasses became the 3rd product, and the most profitable. Daniel didn't sell them on the market. He sold them through Celeste, through her connections, through her late mother's acquaintances, through the nobles who came to Alderaan Castle on visits. Each pair of glasses was made individually. Daniel personally checked each customer's vision. A simple test, a chart of symbols at varying distances. To this world, it looked like a miracle. A man who looks you in the eye and then gives you lenses through which the world becomes sharp. The price. 15 silver coins per pair. Cost price. 2 silver coins. A margin that Daniel, in his past life, had only seen at tech startups. By the 5th month, Daniel had a soap factory, an ink production facility, a lens polishing workshop, a consulting office, 14 employees, Kane and 2 security assistants, the patronage of House Alderaan, and an income of about 100 silver per month. For the district, that was a fortune. For the city, average. For the empire, a pittance. But it was a start, and it was working. It was precisely at this moment, when everything was going according to plan, that something happened the interface hadn't predicted. Or perhaps it had, but with such a low probability that Daniel hadn't paid it any mind. An epidemic. A winter one. An intestinal infection. The very same one he himself had nearly died from in the first few weeks. Only now it had struck not just one people, but the entire southwestern quarter. Dirty water. Cold. Overcrowding. Ideal conditions for bacteria that this world didn't even know existed. The children were the first to die. Daniel found out on the 2nd day. Mira came in the morning, pale. She said a neighbor's child had died, a 2-year-old, overnight, vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration. The doctor didn't even come. Doctors don't go to the slums. Daniel sat down at the table. He closed his eyes. He opened the interface. Search. Oral rehydration therapy. Recipe. 1 liter of boiled water, 6 teaspoons of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, a pinch of baking soda. That's it. A solution that in his world cost $50 a packet. That saved tens of millions of children in the 20th and 21st centuries. That required no laboratories, no pharmacies, no advanced degrees. Water, sugar, salt, baking soda, and the knowledge that this exact mixture saves people from death by dehydration. He looked at Mira, then at Cain. Then he stood up. He needed cauldrons, big ones. He needed sugar, a lot of it. Salt, baking soda, clean water, firewood, people. Mira didn't ask a single question. She turned and went to get the cauldrons. Cain went to get firewood. Daniel went to get sugar and salt. By noon, there were 4 large cauldrons in the soap-making room. The water was boiling. Daniel personally measured out the proportions. Precisely. Every gram. The interface monitored it. 6 teaspoons of sugar is 30 grams. Half a teaspoon of salt is 2.5 grams. A pinch of baking soda is 2 grams. Per liter of water. Liter by liter. Cauldron by cauldron. By evening, they had 100 liters of solution. And then Hae-yoon arrived. Daniel wasn't expecting her. He didn't even know she existed until that day. She appeared in the doorway of the soap factory. Short, dark hair, Eastern features, simple but clean clothes. In her hands, a bag from which bundles of herbs were sticking out. She looked at the cauldrons, at the solution, at Daniel, who was standing over a cauldron with a spoon in his hand. And she said, in broken local dialect with a strong accent, that she was a doctor, that she had come to help, that she had heard that someone here was treating children with water. The interface initiated a scan. Hae-yoon So, age approximately 19, physical condition, good, micro-expressions, determination, fatigue, accustomed to pain, not physical, social, a person who has been rejected many times and who came anyway. Basic motive, help, pure, without calculation. Daniel looked at her. Then he nodded. And they went into the slums, the 2 of them, with buckets. Cain and 2 boys carried the rest. Mira stayed in the soap factory to cook the next batch. The night was long, the longest of his life, in both lives. They went from basement to basement and from door to door. They knocked. They went in. They found children, small, gray, with sunken eyes, with parched lips. The mothers sat nearby, silent, or crying, or praying. Hae-yoon worked in silence, quickly, exactly. She knew how to hold a child, how to give them water, how to check a pulse. She was a real doctor, not a charlatan, not a quack. A doctor, with a different tradition, with different methods, but with the same core. Daniel administered the solution, in small sips, every 15 minutes. 1 spoonful, then another, then another. If the child vomited, they started over, patiently, methodically, spoon by spoon. Hae-yoon was doing her own thing at the same time. Needles, thin ones. She placed them at specific points on the body. Daniel watched. The interface identified it. Acupuncture. Points to relieve nausea and stimulate digestion. He didn't comment. Whether it helped or not, it didn't matter. She was here. She was working. She didn't ask for permission. By morning, they had visited 37 houses. They found 45 sick children. It was already too late for 3 of them. They had died before Daniel and Heyoon could reach them. 42 remained alive. The solution was working. Slowly. But it worked. The bodies that were losing water were getting it back. With salt that kept it in the cells. With sugar that provided energy. The simplest chemistry. The simplest medicine. And 42 children who made it to morning alive. Daniel sat in the snow against a wall. The dawn was gray. Cold. He was black with exhaustion. His hands wouldn't obey him. His head was buzzing. The interface flashed warnings that he had ignored all night. Overload. Overload. Recommendation to shut down. Heyoon sat down next to him. She hadn't slept all night either. Her hands were stained with herbs, dark circles under her eyes. But her eyes were alive, clear. They sat side by side, in silence. Then Daniel spoke, softly, in English, because he couldn't find the words in the local language. He said that in his world it costs $50 a packet. $50. And children don't die. Heyoon didn't understand the words, but she understood the voice. She silently took his hand. Her palm smelled of wormwood. Warm, small, firm. The palm of a man accustomed to healing. By morning, blood was running from Daniel's nose. He wiped it with his sleeve. He stood up. He staggered. Heyoon supported him. Cain approached. Silently, he took him by the arm. They led him to the bakery. Mira was standing at the door. She hadn't slept either. Her face was tired, but when she saw Daniel covered in blood and snow, she didn't cry or wail. She said, "The soup is ready. Sit down." And he sat down, and he ate the soup, and it was good. After a night in the slums, Daniel slept for 18 hours. His body simply shut down. The interface didn't wake him. When he opened his eyes, it was dark in the storeroom. Evening of the next day. He sat up. His head ached. A dull, throbbing pain behind his left eye. The interface displayed his status. Neural load. Critical. Recovery period. 48 hours of minimal activity. Daniel closed the report. He couldn't afford 48 hours. But he could manage 12. He went out to the bakery. Guido was kneading dough. He looked at Daniel and said the boy looked like a corpse. Daniel replied that he felt exactly that way. Mira set a bowl of porridge in front of him. Hot, with honey. Daniel ate slowly. Each spoonful restored a little strength. Heyoon was sitting at the table. She had come in the morning and stayed. Mira didn't mind. Heyoon helped out in the bakery in silence. She washed dishes. She chopped herbs. She moved quietly and precisely, like someone accustomed to taking up little space. Daniel watched her, without the interface, just with his eyes. She was from another world, not his world. Another world of this world. The Eastern Archipelago. A different culture, different medicine, a different way of seeing people. And she had come here to help strangers who considered her an outsider. After breakfast, Daniel gathered everyone together. Mira, Cain, Heyoon. The 4 of them in the back room of the bakery. He said that a night in the slums had changed the situation. Before that, he had been a consultant, a merchant, a soap maker. Now he had become a man who saves children. This is a different level, a different scale of attention. People in the neighborhood will talk. They're already talking. And these conversations will reach certain ears. The church, the guard, the city council. Someone will take an interest. Someone will be frightened. A man who heals with water, and the children don't die. In a world where the church holds a monopoly on miracles, that's a dangerous reputation. Cain asked what to do. Daniel answered, "Don't wait for them to come for us. Act first. Control the story." He turned to Hayun, asked if she agreed to stay, to work with him. Not for free. For room and board, and for the chance to heal people openly, under protection. Hayun didn't answer right away. She said she had been healing people since she was 12, that her father had been an ambassador from the Eastern Archipelago, that he had died a year ago and she had been left here, alone, without money, without papers. She healed whoever she could, for food, for a place to sleep, for silence. 3 times they called her a witch. Twice they beat her. Once they nearly drowned her in a ditch. She'd gotten used to it. But she was tired. And if Daniel was telling the truth, if he really could give her the chance to heal openly, without fear, then she would stay. Daniel nodded. It was true. He was going to keep his word. By the 6th month, Daniel had restructured the business. A soap factory, an ink factory, a lens workshop, an office. He brought it all together under one roof. The Corvus Trading House, officially registered under the patronage of the House of Alderaan. Seal, documents, license from the magistrate. Everything was in order. Everything was legal. Guido remained a baker, but his bakery became part of a chain. Daniel helped him open a second location, at the market. Mira managed both. At 17, she ran the books that half the capital's merchants couldn't understand. Double entry, daily reconciliation, monthly balance sheet. She did it quickly and accurately, and she no longer made mistakes with the letters. Hayun got a room above the soap factory. Clean, with a window. The first room with a window in her life in this city. Daniel saw her standing by that window on the first evening, looking out at the street. Just standing there. For about 10 minutes. Then she turned and said quietly that you could see the sky from here. Daniel didn't know what to say. Because in his past life, seeing the sky from a window was a given. But in her life, it was a privilege. The first attack happened in the 27th week, at night. 2 men broke into the soap factory through the back door. Cain wasn't asleep. He never slept when he needed to stay awake. A brief struggle in the dark, the clang of metal, a scream, then silence. Cain emerged with a cut on his forearm and 2 bodies on the floor. One dead, the other alive, wounded in the thigh. Daniel came downstairs. He looked at the wounded man. The interface scanned him. A mercenary, low level, paid for the job, not for murder, for arson. Someone paid to burn down the soap factory. Daniel crouched down beside him. Hayun was already there, bandaging the wound. Even for an enemy, because she was a doctor. Daniel asked who had sent him. The mercenary remained silent. The interface analyzed his clothes, the fabric, the buttons, the dirt on his boots, the neighborhood, the Eastern Market. That's where Gray Melvin's people were based. The loan shark, to whom Daniel had written off Cain's debt 5 months ago. Melvin hadn't forgotten. In the morning, Daniel went to see Melvin, alone. Kane protested. Daniel insisted. The loan shark lived in a solid house near the Eastern Market. 2 stories, stone, guards at the door. Daniel entered. Melvin was sitting at a table, fat, bald, fingers adorned with rings. At the sight of Daniel, his expression didn't change. He was waiting. The interface scanned the room. 4 guards, armed. 1 exit. Probability of physical confrontation? Successful. 0. Daniel sat down across from him, without invitation. Melvin asked what he wanted. Daniel replied. He wanted Melvin to stop meddling with his people and his business. Melvin smirked. Asked what else. Daniel placed a piece of paper on the table. Thin, folded in half. Melvin unfolded it, read it. His face didn't change, but the interface saw it. Dilated pupils, a pause in his breathing, recalculation. On the paper was a list. Every loan Melvin had issued over the past year. The names of the borrowers, the amounts, the interest rates, the actual market rate listed alongside for comparison. And at the bottom, a single line. A copy has been sent to the city treasurer's office. It was a bluff. No copy had been sent, yet. But Melvin couldn't verify it, not instantly. And he knew that if it were true, the treasurer would take an interest. Not because the treasurer is honest, because the treasurer will want his cut. And when the treasurer starts digging, he'll find things that could cost Melvin not just his business, but his head. Melvin was silent for a long time. A minute, 2. Then he said the kid was playing dangerous games. Daniel replied that he wasn't playing. He was working, and he preferred not to be interrupted. He stood up. He walked out. His back was straight. His legs weren't shaking. But when he turned the corner and Melvin could no longer see him, he leaned against the wall and for 30 seconds just breathed. Because he had just bluffed a man who killed people for less. And if Melvin had decided to call his bluff right then and there, Daniel didn't want to think about it. Melvin didn't call. The arson attacks stopped. But Daniel understood the main thing. He had outgrown the neighborhood. Melvin was small fry. The guild was mid-level. The big players were ahead, and for them, he didn't yet have a bluff, documents, or security. He needed to move up faster, and for that, he needed Celeste. Their relationship was changing, slowly. For the first few weeks, Celeste kept her distance. Formal, polite. She was the employer, he was the advisor. The boundaries were clear. But work blurred the lines. They spent their evenings poring over documents. Daniel explained business schemes to her. She explained court politics to him. Who was connected to whom, who hated whom, who owed whom. Not money, favors, promises, blood. She knew this world as well as Daniel knew code, down to the last character. And when they worked together, their minds didn't overlap. They complemented each other, like 2 processors working on different parts of the same task. One evening, Celeste said something that made Daniel freeze. They were discussing a trade agreement with the House of Varon. The House of Varon wanted exclusivity on the glasses. Celeste suggested turning them down. Daniel suggested agreeing to a 1-year deal with an opt-out clause. Celeste shook her head. She said he didn't understand. The House of Varon didn't want the glasses. The House of Varon wanted control over who made them. Exclusivity is a leash. In a year, they'll pull. And Daniel will find himself on a short leash. Daniel looked at her. The interface confirmed it. The probability that Verone would use exclusivity as leverage, 78%. Celeste was right. Without the interface, without the database, without the probability engine, simply because she had lived for 22 years in a world where every handshake hides a knife. Daniel turned down House Verone, and for the first time ever, he told Celeste, "I trust your instincts." Celeste looked at him for a long time, silently. Then she returned to the documents. But Daniel noticed. The interface noticed. Her hands were no longer clasped. For the first time, they lay on the table, palms open and facing up. In the 7th month, Daniel made a breakthrough that changed everything. Not soap, not ink, not glasses. A printing press. The idea had been brewing for a long time, since the first month when he saw Mira painstakingly copying letters by hand. Books in this world cost a fortune. Each one was copied by hand. Monks in monasteries, scribes at the courts. A single copy, a month's work. 100 silver coins at least. Literacy was a privilege, knowledge was a privilege, and as long as it remained a privilege, nothing in this world could truly change. Daniel knew the history of printing. Gutenberg, the 1440s, typeface, movable type, a press, oil-based ink. The principle was simple. The execution was more complicated. He needed a metalworker, one who could cast small letters, precise, identical, dozens and hundreds of the same symbols, and a press, heavy, precise, with even pressure. Daniel spent 3 weeks designing it, every evening, in a holographic projection, drawing after drawing, a letter, a casting mold, alloy, lead and tin, proportions, melting point, press, screw type, based on the grape press, one that already existed here. It just needed to be adapted. Cain found a blacksmith, an old man, a grumpy one, named Bergd, who once forged swords for the guard and now shoed horses. Daniel came to him with the drawings. Bergd looked at the drawings, then at Daniel, then back at the drawings, and asked what the hell this was. Daniel explained. Small metal letters that can be set in a line, dipped in ink, pressed onto paper, and get text. Identical. 10 copies, 100, 1,000. Bergd was silent. Then he said the boy had lost his mind. Then he looked at the drawings again and said the alloy was interesting, and that he could see how to make the casting molds, and that the boy had gone mad anyway, but work is work. Daniel paid in advance, 20 silver coins, a quarter of a month's income. Bergd worked for a month. Daniel came every day. He checked. He made adjustments. The letters didn't turn out right away. The first batches were crooked, uneven. The letters wobbled. The alloy was sometimes too soft, sometimes too brittle. Daniel changed the proportions. He checked the temperature, changed it again. By the 3rd week, the letters were acceptable. Not perfect, but acceptable. The press was assembled from a wine press. Daniel modified it, added a frame, guides, a flat platform for typesetting. Ink, his own. Oil-based instead of water-based. Thick, doesn't run, doesn't smudge. The first print was made in the evening at the end of the 7th month, in the workshop. Daniel set the type, 23 letters, in the local language. The phrase was simple. Every person has the right to know. He smeared the letters with ink, placed a sheet of paper, lowered the press, raised it, removed the sheet. The letters were a bit crooked, uneven. The ink had smudged in places. But they were there, clear, legible, identical. 23 letters on a sheet of paper that, in 10 seconds, did what a scribe spends a minute on. And that could be repeated, over and over, 100 times, 1,000, 10,000. Mira stood nearby. She looked at the page, then at the machine, then at Daniel, and said quietly, "This means books will be cheap." Daniel nodded. "This means books will be cheap." Mira took the sheet, pressed it to her chest, and said, "This means any girl will be able to learn to read." Daniel looked at her, at the girl who, 6 months ago, could barely write her own name, who now kept the accounts for the trading house, who was holding the first printed sheet on this continent, and who wasn't thinking about money or fame, but about the girls who would be able to read. He said nothing, because his throat tightened and the words wouldn't come out. News of the printing press spread within a week. Daniel didn't hide it. Hiding it was pointless and harmful. He printed the first 10 sheets. Simple texts, a prayer, the neighborhood's commercial code, a table of weights and measures. He handed them out for free. Let people see. Let them talk. Let them understand that the world is changing. The reaction was mixed. The shopkeepers were delighted. A printed commercial code, the same for everyone. No scribal errors, no unnecessary words. Clear, precise. The church was horrified. A prayer printed without a blessing, without a monk's hand, without parchment consecrated in a temple, on plain paper, typewritten. It was more than heresy. It was an assault on the very idea that knowledge belongs to the chosen few. On the 3rd day after the first print, a man in a black cassock came to Daniel. Young, about 25 years old, thin, attentive eyes. He introduced himself as Brother Mark, from the office of the Holy Covenant. He said Cardinal Vector Gray had sent him, with a question. The interface instantly spat out everything it knew about the cardinal. Not much. Head of the Inquisition, 50 years old. Reputation, intelligent, quiet, dangerous. Not a fanatic. Worse than a fanatic. A believing intellectual. You can out-argue a fanatic. Not a believing intellectual. Brother Mark asked a question. Politely, gently. The cardinal is interested. On what grounds does Master Corvus reproduce sacred texts without the covenant's approval? Daniel answered, politely, gently. He said that the printed prayer was an act of veneration, not an insult. That the machine does not write the words. The machine merely repeats what a man has written. That if the church wishes, he is ready to print any texts the church approves, for a reasonable fee. Brother Mark listened. He nodded. He left. Daniel knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. The church wouldn't attack right away. It would watch, study, assess the threat, and then either buy him off or destroy him. The church didn't know of a third option. Daniel began preparing for both possibilities. He printed a second batch. Not prayers. Textbooks. The simplest ones. The alphabet, numbers, the basics of arithmetic. 20 copies. And he handed them out. In the slums, to the children he had saved that winter. To their mothers. For free. With one condition. Everyone who learns to read teaches one more. Mira taught the first lessons. In the back room of the bakery, 5 children, then 10, then 15. A school. Unofficial. No sign, no permit. 30 students by the end of the month. Daniel watched this and thought. In his past world, he wrote code that processed millions of requests per second. Here, he taught children to read one letter at a time. And the latter was more important. Immeasurably more important. Celeste found out about the school. She came. She looked around. She stood silently by the wall and watched as Mira taught an 8-year-old girl to write the letter A. The girl was trying hard. Her tongue stuck out from the effort. A stick. A crossbar. The letter came out crooked. But it was a letter. The first in this girl's life. Celeste approached Daniel after class and said one thing. She said that her mother could read. One of the few women in her circle. And that her mother always said that literacy isn't a privilege, but air. Without air, a living being dies. Without literacy, the mind dies. Daniel replied that her mother was a wise woman. Celeste smiled slightly. For the first time in front of him, quickly, almost imperceptibly. But the interface registered it, and Daniel registered it, without the interface. The 9th month, the time when Daniel first encountered real politics. Not neighborhood politics, not guild politics, imperial politics. Emperor Haldric IV was dying, slowly, in full view of the entire capital. His 3 sons no longer hid their animosity. Prince Marcus was gathering troops at the northern gates. Prince Victor spent his days in the Temple of the Bright Covenant, speaking of God's will. Prince Lionel, the middle son, quiet. He sat in his palace and waited. The capital buzzed like a beehive before a storm. There were more soldiers on the streets. There were fewer goods in the markets. Prices were rising. People were nervous. Daniel could feel it in his bones. Not metaphorically. The interface was detecting changes in behavioral patterns on the streets. People were walking faster, speaking more quietly, stocking up. Classic signs of a pre-war state. Celeste came to see him that evening. Her face was serious, more serious than usual. She said that the House of Alderaan had to choose a side. If they didn't choose, then when one of the princes won, he would remember those who hadn't supported him, and he would punish them. Not immediately. Later. Quietly. Through taxes. Through land. Through marriages. Through 1,000 small blows that kill a house more slowly than a sword, but more surely. Daniel listened. Then he sent a request to the interface. A full analysis of the 3 candidates, based on all data collected over the past 9 months. Marcus, the eldest, a military man, a strong army, support from the northern dukes, personality, harsh, impulsive, prone to violence as a solution. Probability of being a good ruler, low. Probability of being a stable ruler, average. Probability of betraying allies after victory, high. Victor, the younger one. A man of the church. Support from the Bright Covenant. Cardinal Gray, personally. Personality. Fanatical. Manipulated. A puppet of the church. Probability of being a good ruler. Close to 0. Probability of initiating religious purges. High. Lionel. Average. Diplomat. Small army. Limited support. Personality. Calm. Analytical. honest to a fault. Probability of betraying allies, low. Probability of being a good ruler, high, provided he has competent advisors. Daniel looked at the results. Then he closed the interface, because he already knew the answer before he saw the numbers. Lionel. Not because he's the best, because he's the only one of the three who won't interfere with what Daniel was building. Schools, books, medicine, fair scales. Everything that Marcus considered a weakness and Victor considered heresy, Lionel considered reasonable. The problem was one thing. Lionel was the weakest of the three. And for him to win, he needed something he didn't have. An advantage. One that isn't measured by swords. Daniel turned to Celeste and said that the House of Alderaan should support Lionel. Celeste wasn't surprised. She'd been thinking the same thing. But she asked, "How? The House of Alderaan isn't an army. It isn't a treasury. What could they offer a prince who had no chance?" Daniel replied, "They can offer him me." Celeste looked at him for a long time. Then she asked quietly if he was overestimating himself. Daniel replied that he wasn't. Not in this case. Because war isn't decided on the battlefield. War is decided before the battle, through intelligence, logistics, information. And he has a tool that no one else in this world possesses. He didn't say what it was. Celeste didn't ask. She had long since stopped asking. The meeting with Lionel took place a week later, at Alderaan Castle, neutral territory. Lionel arrived with 3 guards and his advisor. Short, 30 years old, dark hair, dark eyes. A face that in Daniel's former world would have been called intelligent. Not military, not authoritative, thoughtful. The interface launched a full scan. Prince Lionel Velmar. Physical condition. Good. An old injury to his right shoulder. Limited mobility. Micro-expressions. Caution. Curiosity. Hidden fatigue. Basic motive. Not power. Order. He didn't want the throne for the sake of the throne. He wanted the throne because he saw that his brothers would destroy what remained of the empire, and he believed he could prevent that. Not rebuild it. At least, not destroy it. Daniel looked at him and saw a man he could respect. That was important, because Daniel had no intention of serving someone he didn't respect. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Celeste handled the political part, the alliance of houses, terms, guarantees. She spoke in a language Lionel understood, the language of the court, the language of promises and subtext. Daniel spoke up at the end, when Lionel asked what exactly Master Corvus could offer that others could not. Daniel answered, "He can predict what Marcus will do. Not after he does it, before." Lionel raised an eyebrow. Daniel explained, "Not a prophecy, analysis. Marcus is predictable, a military mind, linear strategy, force against force. He'll press forward, head on, from the north. His dukes don't know any other way. And if you know where he'll strike a week before the strike, even a small army can be in the right place at the right time." Lionel listened. Skeptically, but he listened. Then he asked, "Where does such confidence come from?" Daniel replied that in 3 days, Marcus would move his vanguard to the bridge across the Grey River, because the bridge is the only crossing that can be held with a small force, and because Marcus had received a report from intelligence that the bridge was unguarded. Lionel froze. He asked how Daniel knew about the intelligence report. Daniel didn't answer. He smiled. He didn't know about the intelligence report. He had calculated that Marcus would send reconnaissance to the bridge, and that reconnaissance would report that the bridge was empty. Because the bridge really was empty. Because no one but Daniel considered it strategically important. Yet. 3 days later, Marcus moved his vanguard to the bridge across the Gray River, just as Daniel had predicted. Lionel received a report from his men. He read it twice. Then he ordered Master Corvus to be brought to him. Daniel arrived. Lionel looked at him and said one sentence. He said he didn't understand who he was, but that he wanted this man on his side. Daniel nodded and got to work. The next 3 months were the most intense of his life, in both lives. He effectively became the prince's shadow advisor. Not officially. Officially, he remained an advisor to House Alderaan. But every evening, a courier brought him a package of data. Troop deployments, intelligence reports, intercepted letters. Daniel processed everything. The interface built models, army positions, supply routes, the probabilities of each maneuver. Daniel sent back recommendations. Brief, precise. Move the garrison, block the road. Send a messenger to such and such a baron with such and such a proposal. Every recommendation worked, because it was based not on intuition, but on data. On thousands of data points that the interface collected and analyzed continuously. But the price was high. The interface was consuming his brain, literally. Every complex query was a strain on his neural connections. Migraines became a daily occurrence. Nosebleeds, 2 or 3 times a week. Fainting spells, brief ones, 5 to 10 seconds. Heyoon saw it, and she kept quiet for the first 3 weeks. Then she stopped keeping quiet. She came to him at night. He was sitting over a map. His temples were clenched in his palms. She sat down beside him, placed her hands on his head. Her fingers were warm, precise. They found the spots that hurt. She pressed. The pain receded. It didn't go away. It receded. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time in a month, he let someone touch him. For the first time in both their lives. He had always been the kind of person no one touched. Not because he forbade it, because no one had ever tried. Heyoon didn't ask for permission. She just treated him, as naturally as she breathed, without words. She said quietly that he was killing himself, that his body couldn't take it, that she could see from his eyes, his pulse, his skin, that something inside him was wearing itself out. She didn't know what, but she saw the result. Daniel was silent. Then he said he knew. Heyoon asked what for. Daniel answered, so that fewer people would die in the next war. Heyoon paused. Then she said that was a good reason, but a bad trade-off. Because if he died, there would be no one left to save those he wanted to save. Daniel looked at her and thought she was right, and that this was exactly the logic he himself had used in his calculations. Optimizing the long-term outcome, not sacrificing a key resource for the sake of a short-term gain. He was the key resource, and he was using himself up. From that day on, Heyoon came every evening. She treated his migraines. She made him sleep. She made him eat. She brewed decoctions that reduced inflammation. She inserted needles into points he didn't know existed. The interface recorded improvement. Neural load decreased by 12% after her sessions. 12% was a lot. It was the difference between fainting and a clear head. Daniel once told her this. Not about the percentage, about how, after her touch, he thought more clearly. Hayun smiled slightly, for the first time in front of him, and said it wasn't her hands. It was his head finally getting some rest, because for the first time, someone was letting it rest. In the 10th month, Daniel met Yuna, or rather, Yuna met him, by trying to snatch his wallet at the market. He was walking through the market stalls. Cain was 2 steps behind him. It was an ordinary day, buying supplies for the soap factory. The interface was running in the background. Mapping, facial indexing, standard routine. And suddenly, an alert. Movement on the left. Quick, a small figure, a hand reaching for his belt, for his wallet. Daniel managed to grab her wrist. Slender, almost childlike. Standing before him was a girl. Petite, dirty, tangled hair, tattered clothes. But her eyes weren't those of a child. Sharp, quick, calculating. Eyes that had seen it all. Exits, security, distance to the nearest alley, the time it would take to run there. The interface displayed the scan results. Age approximately 16. Physical condition, malnutrition, chronic. Old fractures. 2. Left forearm and a rib. Micro-expressions. Fear, suppressed, calculation, readiness to flee. Basic motive. Survival. Pure, unadulterated. Daniel held her wrist. Cain had already stepped forward, hand on his sword. The girl flinched. Hard. Unexpectedly hard for such a body. Daniel didn't let go. Nor did he squeeze tighter. He just held on. Cain asked if he should call the guards. The guards would chop off a hand for theft at the market. The right one. To be permanent. It took Daniel just a second to decide. He said no. Not the guards. He asked the girl her name. She was silent. She looked at him. She was calculating. Every second he didn't call the guards changed her calculations. Daniel said he wasn't going to turn her in, but he wanted to know her name. She said it. Yuna. Daniel let go of her wrist. Yuna didn't run away. She stood there. She looked. She waited for a trick. Daniel asked if she was hungry. A stupid question. An obvious answer. She had been hungry for as long as she could remember. He nodded to Cain. Cain sighed. But he went to the pie stand. They sat on the steps by the market wall. Yuna ate the pie, quickly, greedily. She didn't take bites. She tore off pieces, shoved them into her mouth. Daniel didn't rush her. He waited. When she finished eating, he asked a question. How many wallets does she pick a day? Yuna looked at him, warily. Then she answered. 2 or 3, if she's lucky. Daniel asked how much that was in copper coins. Yuna said, 10 to 15, if there's no silver. Silver is rare. Daniel nodded. 10 to 15 copper coins. A risk. Losing a hand, or worse, every day, for a handful of copper. He asked, what if he offered her 20 copper coins a day, for work that doesn't risk losing a hand? Yuna narrowed her eyes. She asked, what kind of work? Daniel replied, watch, listen, remember. Tell him. Yuna was silent. Then she asked why he needed that. Daniel replied that he needed eyes and ears in places he couldn't get to himself. Yuna thought. For a long time, for a 16-year-old thief. 30 seconds. Then she said that for 20 copper coins and 3 meals a day, she'd agree. Daniel held out his hand. Una shook it. The hand was small, tough, with calluses not from work but from climbing walls. Una turned out to be the best acquisition in all 10 months. Better than the soap factory, better than the printing press, because Una was the eyes and ears that no interface could replace. She knew the slums as well as Daniel knew the code. Every alley, every manhole, every roof you could walk across. She knew who lived in which basement, who dealt in stolen goods, where the gangs gathered, when the guards changed shifts. She knew this not because she gathered information, but because it was a matter of survival. 10 years on the streets, since she was 6, without parents, without protection, without hope. And she survived. That told more about her than any scan. During the first week, Una brought back snippets. Rumors from the market. Who had quarreled? Who had made up? Trivialities. But Daniel didn't send her back. He didn't criticize. He listened. He took notes. And every evening he explained exactly what he needed. Not gossip. Patterns. Repetitive actions. Unusual visits. Unfamiliar faces in familiar places. New people at Melvin's. Monks who don't go to the temple. Soldiers who don't go on duty. Una listened. She memorized. She learned faster than anyone Daniel knew. Because for her, information wasn't an abstraction. Information was the difference between life and death. She understood this on an instinctive level. By the end of the second week, Una had made her first real discovery. She said she'd seen Marcus's people in the slums. Not soldiers, people in plain clothes, who were handing out money, not to the poor, gang leaders, 4 of them, in different neighborhoods. Daniel froze. The interface instantly built a model. Marcus was buying up the slums. Not literally. He was buying chaos. If, at the right moment, the slums erupted, a riot, arson, looting, the guards would be tied up inside the city. And they wouldn't man the walls when Marcus's troops approached from the north. A classic diversion. Daniel had seen this tactic in military history dozens of times. A 5th column. Sabotage in the rear. Marcus was preparing a simultaneous strike, from the outside and the inside. Daniel sent a message to Lionel, through Celeste, through a secure channel. He described the threat. He proposed a plan. Don't strike at the gangs. That would give away the source of the information. Instead, buy off 2 of the 4 leaders, with money or promises. Isolate the remaining 2, quietly, without a fuss. Arrest them on criminal charges that are already hanging over them, before Marcus gave the order. Lionel carried it out, precisely, quietly. A month later, Marcus's sabotage network in the capital ceased to exist. Marcus never found out why. His people simply stopped getting in touch, one by one, as if the city had swallowed them up. Una changed after that. Not right away, gradually. She saw that her information was working, that what she brought mattered, that Daniel was listening, really listening, not as a handout, as something valuable. She started coming in earlier, leaving later, asking questions, asking for books, those very textbooks from Mira's school, the alphabet, numbers, She studied the letters in the evenings, in the room above the soap factory, next to Heyoon. Heyoon didn't mind. She silently moved the candle closer when she saw Yuna squinting. Two strangers in a strange city, who found each other through a third stranger. In the fourth week, Yuna nearly died. She was tailing one of Marcus's men, one who hadn't been neutralized yet. He noticed she was following him. He cornered her. He had a knife. She had nothing. Cain didn't know. Daniel didn't know. Yuna was alone, as always. She survived because she was faster, and because she knew the dead end better than he did. She squeezed through a crack in the wall that a grown man couldn't fit through. She made it to the bakery, at night. Her shirt was torn, a cut on her shoulder, not deep, but bleeding. Heyoon bandaged it, silently, without questions. Daniel asked the questions. Then he fell silent. Then he said quietly, "Yuna, you can stop bringing me any news. You'll stay anyway. This is your home." Yuna looked at him for a long time. Her face was still. Her eyes were still. But something in them was changing, slowly, like ice cracking from the inside. She said nothing. She nodded. She went to her room. Heyoon said later, quietly, that Yuna had cried in her sleep, for the first time in the weeks they'd shared a room, and that in the morning, for the first time in those same weeks, she'd smiled. At breakfast, for a second, when Mira passed her a roll. Daniel sat in the storeroom and thought. 10 months. From a starving basement to the prince's shadow advisor. From 3 copper coins to a trading house. From a single baker to an army of 60 fighters and a network of informants in every neighborhood. School, the print shop, the hospital, the soap factory, the workshop, the people. Mira, who keeps the Empire's books on a single block scale. Cain, who stays awake when he needs to stay awake. Heyoon, who heals his head and his soul, though he never asked for the latter. Yuna, who sees what the interface doesn't. Celeste, who thinks one step ahead of him in a world she knows better. They were all here. They all followed the boy from the basement. Not because he saw the future, because he saw them. Each one, as a person, not as a function, not as a resource, as a person. And that was what scared him the most. Because the interface in his peripheral vision was quietly flashing a message he saw every day and put off every day. Previous operator. File unlocked. Access pending. The previous operator who also saw people, who also built, who also saved, and who, in the end, wrote. I saw what we're becoming. Daniel closed his eyes. In 4 months, there will be a war, a real one, a big one, with blood and fire and thousands of dead. And he will sit in a tent over a map and decide which of those thousands will survive. And at that moment, he will know whether he can remain a man who sees people or become a man who sees columns of probabilities. The war did not begin with drums or trumpets. The war began with a letter, a short one, on fine paper, bearing Prince Marcus's seal. The letter arrived at all the noble houses of the capital simultaneously, in the morning, by mounted couriers. Marcus declared himself regent to his dying father and demanded an oath. Anyone who did not swear allegiance within 3 days would be declared a traitor. Their property would be confiscated, their titles revoked. Daniel read the letter in Celeste's study. The interface analyzed the text, the style, the vocabulary, the sentence structure. It wasn't written by Marcus himself. It was written by his chancellor, the man whom Daniel had identified 3 months ago, Baron Talver, an old fox, the emperor's former treasurer. He defected to Marcus when he realized that Haldric wouldn't rise to the occasion. Talver was more dangerous than Marcus himself, because Marcus thought with a sword, while Talver thought with money. And in a long war, money always beats swords. Celeste stood by the window, back straight, hands behind her back. She already understood everything. 3 days. Marcus had given 3 days not out of generosity, out of calculation. In 3 days, no one would have time to unite. Every house would have to decide on its own. And on its own, no one could stand against Marcus and his northern dukes. Except for those who united before the deadline expired. Daniel had already done the math. Interface was building a model. Houses that would support Marcus. Houses that would waver. Houses that wouldn't support him. Time, distances, messengers. How many hours until each of Lionel's potential allies? What words to use to convince each one? What to promise? What threats to make? The decision tree was growing in the projection before his eyes. Dozens of branches, hundreds of outcomes, percentage by percentage. He turned to Celeste, said they didn't have 3 days. They had 36 hours. Because on the 3rd day, Marcus would march his troops into the capital regardless of the answers. The letter was not an ultimatum. It was a diversion. While they were reading and deliberating at home, Marcus was already on the move. His vanguard was 2 days' march away. The cavalry, a day and a half. Celeste looked at him. She asked how he knew. Daniel answered. Una. Her men had seen columns on the northern road the day before yesterday. 600 horsemen, 2 banners. The northern dukes. That's the vanguard. The main forces are following, 3,000 to 4,000, against the capital's garrison of 1,200, half of whom don't know who to obey. For the next 30 hours, Daniel didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He didn't stop. The interface was running at full capacity, 3 parallel processes, maximum. His brain couldn't handle any more. The first process, coordinating Lionel's allies, messengers, 8 of them, to different houses, each with a personal message that Daniel had drafted in an hour. For Baron Kreit, a military man, words of honor and duty. For Count Morin, a merchant, numbers, how much he would lose if Marcus confiscated his goods in the northern ports. For Lady Vernus, the widow, a promise that her grandson would receive a position at the new court. Each letter hits the mark. Each letter is written so that the recipient would read it and make a decision within 2 hours. Not 2 days, 2 hours. The second task, the city's defense. Daniel could not command the troops. He is not a soldier. But he could show where to stand. The interface built a map of the capital. Every street, every gate, every bridge, every tower. It overlaid Marcus's cavalry approach routes onto it. Speed of movement, time of arrival, entry points. And he identified 3 places where a small detachment could hold off large forces. The narrow streets near the northern gates, the bridge over the canal, the square in front of the palace. 3 points, 3 detachments, 100 men in each. Lionel listened and nodded. He understood maps. He understood tactics. He just had never seen a map like this. So precise, with such detail, with timestamps showing where the enemy would be in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. The third process, the hardest one. People. Not soldiers. Ordinary people. Slum dwellers. The very slums where Daniel had saved children that winter. Melvin is dead, killed by his own men while trying to flee the city with someone else's money. But the gangs that Marcus bought months ago, 2 out of 4 had been bought out, 2 neutralized. But over the past few weeks, new ones have appeared. Marcus or Talver sent new people, with new money. Una reported yesterday, 30 people in the slums, armed, waiting for the signal. When Marcus's army approaches the walls, the slums are supposed to go up in flames. Fires, panic. The guards abandon the walls and put them out. The gates are open. Daniel looked at Cain. Cain understood without words. 60 fighters, not soldiers. The trading house is security, former mercenaries, former soldiers. People Daniel had picked up over the course of a year. Clothed, fed, paid fairly, given a home. They were loyal to him, not out of fear, out of gratitude, out of respect, out of that strange feeling that arises when, for the first time in your life, you're treated like a human being and not just meat. Cain divided them into 3 groups, 20, 20, 20. Una pointed out the addresses, 3 houses, 3 warehouses, where Marcus's men were holed up. At night, 8 hours before the cavalry arrived, Cain struck. Simultaneously, quietly, quickly. 26 out of 30 were taken alive. 4 killed while resisting. Cain's losses. 2 wounded. Not a single casualty. Daniel was standing over the map when Cain entered and reported. Clean. Daniel nodded. He made a note and allowed himself a single second of relief. 1. Then he returned to the map. In the morning, Marcus's cavalry approached the northern gate. 600 horsemen. 2 banners. The gate was closed. Lionel's men stood on the walls. There were no fires in the city. There was no panic. The slums were silent. The cavalry commander stood at the gate for 3 hours. Then he withdrew, without an assault. 600 horsemen cannot take city walls. That requires infantry, siege engines, time. And Marcus had no time. Because during those 30 hours while Marcus waited for the oath, Lionel had gathered allies. 7 houses, 1,400 swords. Not many, but enough to prevent Marcus from simply entering the city and taking the throne. The war had moved into its next phase, a war of attrition. Marcus set up camp north of the capital. Victor, the younger, the cleric. He occupied the temple quarter and proclaimed himself the voice of God. He was supported by the temple guard. 300 men. Not an army, but not nothing either. The city was divided into 3 parts. The north, Marcus. The temple quarter, Victor. The rest, Lionel. A stalemate, which could last for weeks, or end in a single day if someone found a weak spot. Daniel found a weak spot in 2 days. Not with Marcus. Marcus's weak spot was logistics. His army was camped in the open, without shelter, without supplies. Winter wasn't over yet. Cold, hunger, disease. In a month, his army would start to dwindle. But a month is a long time. In a month, Marcus could make a deal with Victor, join forces, and then Lionel would lose. The weak spot was with Victor, or rather, not with Victor, with Cardinal Gray, who stood behind Victor, who controlled Victor like a puppeteer controls a puppet, and who, Daniel was almost certain, did not want war. Gray wanted control, not bloodshed. Control over knowledge, over literacy, over what people think and believe. War is chaos, and chaos destroys control. Daniel asked Celeste to arrange a meeting with Cardinal Gray, in person, one-on-one. Celeste looked at him as if he were crazy, but she didn't refuse, because over the course of a year she had learned to distinguish his madness from his genius. The difference was subtle, but it was there. The meeting took place 3 days later, in a small chapel on the border between Lionel's territory and the Temple Quarter. Neutral ground, sacred, where, according to custom, no blood may be shed. Cardinal Vector Gray sat on a stone bench, alone, without guards. He was just as they had described him, thin, quiet, with the face of a weary saint. His eyes were light, almost transparent. His hands were folded on his knees, calm. The interface launched a full scan and returned a result that made Daniel shudder inwardly. Micro-expressions. Completely controlled. No involuntary movements. No leaks. This man controlled his face the way Daniel controlled the interface. Absolutely. Basic motive? Undetermined. For the first time in a year, the interface was unable to determine a person's basic motive, because this man had too many of them. Or none at all. Or one so deep that a superficial scan wasn't enough. Gray spoke first, quietly. His voice was even, without inflection. He said he was glad to finally meet a man who handed out water in the slums, and the children didn't die, who types books on a typewriter, who sees the future a week before it happens. He said he'd wanted to ask for a long time. Where from? Not where the knowledge came from, where the certainty came from. Because knowledge can be stolen, but certainty cannot. Daniel was silent. He listened. He waited. Gray continued. He said that in the church archives, deep down, in the vaults where only 3 living people are allowed, there are records. Old ones. Very old ones. About a man without a past who appeared 80 years ago, who knew things he couldn't possibly know, who rose higher than any outcast before him, and who once came to this very chapel, to Gray's predecessor. And they spoke all night. And in the morning, the man with no past left, and never returned. Never. Daniel didn't move. The interface flickered, but he wasn't looking at the interface. He was looking at the cardinal. Who knew? Not everything, but enough. Gray looked back at him and said quietly, "Boy, I don't want you dead. I want you to be afraid of who you'll become. Because that one, the previous one, didn't get scared in time." Daniel was silent. Then he asked what the cardinal wanted. Gray answered. He wants the books that Daniel's machine prints to begin with the of the covenant. He wants schools in the slums to teach prayer alongside literacy. He wants knowledge to go hand in hand with faith. Not because faith is more important than knowledge, but because knowledge without faith is a sword without a sheath. Sooner or later, it will cut its master. Daniel thought, for a long time, by the standards of a conversation, 30 seconds. The interface was building a tree of outcomes, if he agreed. The church would withdraw from Victor. Victor would be left without support, without the temple guard, without the covenant's money, without legitimacy. He would fall within a week. Lionel would be left alone with Marcus. and with the church's support. That's the price. The church's control over education. Partial, but control. A prayer on every page. A blessing over every school. A restriction. Not critical, but a restriction. Daniel looked at Gray and said, "He agrees. On one condition. The church does not ban a single book, ever. It blesses as many as it wants. It does not ban, not a single one." Gray was silent for a long time, a minute, two. Then he said quietly that this was a dangerous condition, that there would be books that would make the world shudder. Daniel replied that the world was already trembling, from hunger, from the plague, from ignorance, and that a book had never killed anyone, unlike a ban. Gray closed his eyes, opened them, and nodded, barely noticeably. Once. They stood up, shook hands. The cardinal's hand was dry, cold, firm. The hand of a man who had just given up part of what he considered sacred, for the sake of something he considered necessary. 4 days later, Victor was left without support. The temple guard returned to the temples. The church declared neutrality. Victor sat in his chambers, alone, with a lute and a prayer book, and the realization that his game was over. He didn't resist when Lionel sent for him. Quiet, broken. A former prince, a future monk. Gray would take care of him. That, too, was part of the deal. Unspoken, but understood by both. Marcus remained, with an army, out in the cold, in the open field, without an ally in the city, without saboteurs, without the church's support, but still with 4,000 swords. Battle was inevitable. The only question was where and when, and who would dictate the terms. Daniel already knew the answer. The Gray Fields, a plain northwest of the capital, wide, open. A river on one side, hills on the other. Marcus would choose this place because the plain favors cavalry, and cavalry is his main strength. Daniel did not try to dissuade him. He began preparing the fields so that the plain would no longer be advantageous. The Battle of the Gray Fields took place in the 14th month. Daniel had been preparing for it for 2 weeks. Every day, every night. The interface was working at its limit. He had a nosebleed every morning. Hayun silently wiped it away. She set needles. She brewed a decoction. She looked at him with eyes that held both warmth and fear. She knew what he was doing to himself. She couldn't stop him, because behind him stood thousands of people who would survive or perish, depending on the accuracy of his calculations. The Gray Fields. A plain 2 kilometers long, 1 kilometer wide. To the west, the Vena River. Shallow, but the banks are steep. To the east, a ridge of hills, covered with sparse forest. From the north, the road along which Marcus would arrive. From the south, the road to the capital. Marcus would position the cavalry in the center. 600 horsemen, the main assault. Infantry on the flanks. 1,500 on each side. The reserve behind the hill, 500. A classic formation. A textbook of military strategy. Daniel knew this textbook. All the textbooks, from Sun Tzu to Clausewitz, and he knew that the classics only work when the enemy plays by the same rules. Lionel's army was smaller, 2,200 against 4,000. Almost no cavalry, 200 against 600. In a head-on clash, there was no chance. The interface confirmed it. Probability of victory with a standard formation, 14%. Daniel wasn't going to gamble on 14%. He was going to change the conditions. First, terrain. 3 days before the battle, Daniel sent Cain with 30 men to the gray fields. At night, with shovels. They dug. Narrow trenches. Shallow. Knee-deep. Camouflaged. In the path of the cavalry attack. 200 meters of trenches. Invisible. A horse at full gallop kicks its hoof in a trench. The leg breaks. The rider falls. The next rider crashes into the fallen one. 600 riders become 400. Then 300. Then chaos. Second, intelligence. Una and her men monitored Marcus's camp continuously. A report every hour. Number of campfires, tent locations, patrol routes. Daniel knew where every one of Marcus's units was stationed. Every commander, every supply train. He knew that Marcus's northern flank was weaker. Baron Drake's militiamen were stationed there. Poorly trained, poorly motivated. They fought for money, not for an idea. The money was running out. So was the motivation. Third, supplies. A week before the battle, Daniel cut off 3 of the 4 roads along which Marcus received his provisions. Not by troops, by merchants, who suddenly, all at once, stopped transporting grain to the north, because Daniel had offered them a better price in the south. Marcus wasn't starving, but his men were eating half as much as they had a week ago. A hungry soldier is a poor soldier. That's not theory, it's math. The day of the battle. Dawn. The gray fields in the fog. Daniel stood on a hill. Next to him were Lionel and Ro, Captain Rowena Cain, the niece of that very same Cain. She had appeared in Daniel's life a month ago. Tall, red-haired, with a scar across her eyebrow. She had come to Cain, uncle and niece, a former mercenary, the best fencer of anyone Daniel had ever assessed. Reaction, speed, coordination, stats higher than any man in the garrison. She despised Daniel, openly, called him a bookworm, said that real people settle matters with a sword, not a pen. Daniel didn't argue. He gave her command of his personal guard, the 50 best fighters. Ro accepted. Not out of respect, out of pragmatism. No one else had offered her command. Now she stood beside him, in armor, with a sword, looking out at the field. Daniel looked at the projection, the battle map, updated in real time. Positions, distances, time. He saw Marcus's cavalry forming for the attack. 600 horsemen. Beautiful, formidable. Useless in 10 minutes. He turned to Lionel. He said, "Have the center retreat, slowly, in an orderly fashion, 200 meters, to the line of trenches." Lionel looked at him. Doubt was written on his face. A retreat at the start of a battle was an invitation to rout. Daniel said, "Trust me." Lionel was silent for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. He gave the order. Lionel's center began to retreat, slowly, step by step. Marcus saw it, from the opposite hill. The interface processed his reaction via Una's reports. Marcus smiled. He ordered the cavalry to attack. 600 horsemen moved forward, at a trot, then at a gallop. The ground rumbled. A beautiful sight. a terrifying sight. 2,000 hooves on the frozen ground. The front ranks reached the line of trenches, and the world ended for Marcus's cavalry. Horses were falling. Riders were flying over their heads. The ones behind them crashed into the fallen. Within 10 seconds, the attack had turned into a mess. A third of the cavalry was on the ground. Horses were screaming. Men were screaming. The rest stopped. They lost formation. They lost speed. And without speed, cavalry is just men on horses. Slow. Big. Easy targets. Daniel wasn't looking at the field. He was looking at the northern flank, at Baron Drake's militia, who were watching the cavalry attack collapse, who hadn't eaten their fill in 3 days, who were fighting for pay that never came. He turned to Lionel. He said, "Now! The northern flank, with all our strength." Lionel gave the order. 1,000 fighters struck at Marcus's northern flank, simultaneously, with precision, at the weakest point. Drake's militia held out for 4 minutes. Then they ran. The flank collapsed, like a wall from which a single stone had been knocked out. And through the breach that formed, Lionel's troops broke through to the rear of Marcus's center. Rowe led the guard, 50 fighters, into the breach, first, with a sword. Daniel saw her on the projection, a red dot, fast, precise. She cut through the chaos like an algorithm through unstructured data, finding a path, creating a path, every movement precise, every strike in its place. Daniel watched, and for the first time understood what Cain meant when he said his niece was the best. She wasn't just good. She was perfect. In battle. Only in battle. And it was both beautiful and terrifying. The battle lasted 4 hours. By noon, it was all over. Marcus retreated. He lost a third of his army. Killed, wounded, deserters. Drake surrendered. The other 2 barons fled north. Marcus fled with the remnants of his cavalry. They'll catch him in 3 weeks. At the border, trying to escape to the steppe horde. They won't catch him. His own squire will betray him. For a pardon. Daniel stood on the hill. The battle was over. The field lay below. He didn't want to look, but he looked. Bodies. Hundreds. Men who had been alive that morning, eating porridge, checking their weapons, thinking of home, of their wives, of their children. Now they lay there, motionless, on the frozen ground, amid the mud and blood. The interface offered statistics. Daniel declined. Not now. Not here. By evening, his men began to arrive. One by one. Cain, alive. A cut on his cheek. Nothing serious. Rowe, alive. Blood on the armor. Someone else's. Lost 3 out of 50. Squad captains. Alive. Wounded, but alive. Daniel stood and silently marked each one. On the interface projection. Check mark. Alive. Check mark. Alive. Check mark. Alive. No one saw the projection. No one saw his hand, which were trembling. Because 3 check marks hadn't been placed. 3 people hadn't returned. 3 out of 60. People he knew by name, who had eaten at his house, who had guarded his door. 3. It was few by the standards of war, and an infinite number by the standards of a man who knew their names. Ro came over in the evening, without armor, in a simple shirt. Her hair was wet, washed clean of blood. She stood before him and said nothing. Then she spoke. She said she had been wrong, that he wasn't a bookworm, that what he had done on that field no general she knew could have done, and that she was ashamed. Daniel looked at her, at the woman with a scar across her eyebrow who, 4 hours ago, had cut a path through the enemy army, and who now stood before him and said she was ashamed. He replied. He didn't need her apology. He needed her sword. Tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that. Ro looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, once, briefly, like a soldier, and she left.
Hey true fan, want videos YouTube will never see? Join me on Patreon, link in description.